Lucy Bailey. I work for, I'm head of How to Thrive. How to Thrive is quite an unusual entity in that we are a full cost recovery service located within Hertfordshire County Council, but for all intents and purposes we are like a community interest company because we don't actually get any money from the local authorities to do any of our work. We are out working with, being commissioned for particular pieces of work in Hertfordshire, or we've got customers right across the UK and internationally. And this project, called the Developing Healthy Minds in Teenagers, is a partnership between ourselves and the London School of Economics. So basically our role is to build on the research that's been suggested, put this together as a programme or an approach to delivering PSHE in schools, and the London School of Economics will be setting up the research design and analysing the data. And as just was mentioned, the Education Endow Foundation have funded the academic attainment element of the project. So we are looking at two things. We're looking at a healthy mind, so we'll be looking at measures around young people, improvement around a healthy mind, and we're also looking at about educational attainment. In pretty much every other environment, we know the correlation between if we're feeling good and functioning well will have an impact on the whole range of outcomes that we might be looking at, whatever public sector body or charity we might be in. There is evidence to link the two. And probably schools is an area where there is less known, or there's less been sort of evidence around this correlation, and part of that is some of the practical implications that I will talk to you about, and the time and how the value of subjects like PSHE and so on. And then in addition to the research in terms of the project, the National Institute of Economic and Social Research have been funded to to evidence the whole thing, so they're doing some independent evaluation about the project overall. So it's a very well-resourced approach to PSHE. I just wanted to say a little bit about the context and background of where it comes from, because I've been working in local authority now for 15 years. I mean, in the previous life, I was involved in drug education. Much more specifically, I had a lead role for implementing the Young People's Substance Misuse Plan in Hertfordshire. So I know some of the challenges around risky behaviour around drugs and alcohol. I also know that sometimes the indicators of those risks are not necessarily what we might expect. So sometimes they come from all sorts of different places. But when you look at sort of emotional behavioural problems and adolescent suicides, which we know are on the increase, we actually did some work in Hertfordshire looking at the profile of the young people that were taking their lives. And they weren't the usual suspects. They were young people that were doing well in school, they came from seemingly supportive families, they had friendship groups, and everybody around them was so surprised that that's what, that they'd taken that. So sometimes what we see behind these, figures that come out from places like the Institute of Psychiatry, is getting underneath what some of those figures sometimes mean, and that sometimes means at a local level. And then the Good Childhood Inquiry looked at, has identified that 1 in 10, 5 to 16-year-olds is now clinically diagnosed in some form of sort of anxiety, depression, mental health type thing. Whatever our thought about where that comes from and why that is sort of not irrelevant, but this is the picture that we are seeing, so we need to respond to it. And we know that this idea about a link between feeling good and functioning well can have really, really good outcomes, across this whole range of things. So healthy behaviour, crime reduction, pro-social behaviour, social integration, we know that. So what happened was, as has been mentioned, that there was some research that was commissioned by the Paul Hamlin Foundation and sent a researcher called Dan Hale off around looking for these evidence-based programmes. So what he came back with was a list of programmes that are all evidence-based through randomised controlled studies or well evidence research to say yes, they had an impact in this area. Okay, and we had a long list of programmes. And basically what we did is we actually worked with schools at that stage to say, how might we use this knowledge? So these programmes, these elements that we know that work and are evidence-based on their own, what can we do with them next, really? And the last thing to say, just in terms of the background, that this is building on the implementation and scale-up of the Penn Resilience Programme. So the Penn Resilience Programme is an evidence-based programme, an 18-lesson programme that has, seen some really good improvements around, anxiety, depression levels and academic attainment. And I know that because I was involved in implementing that. There were 3 local authority areas, Hertfordshire, Manchester and South Tyneside. There was an RC, a randomised controlled study that looked at that with 22 schools. And my role was beyond that research, was then to implement this across across the country. So how could we make this, what we know from the research, work practically for schools? We now have around 84 secondary schools and a number of primary schools that teach PRP as part of their core curriculum in schools, with an hour per week timetabled in the curriculum, with staff who've been trained to teach that programme. So we're really building on that knowledge, really. So this is what the project is. As I've said, we're aiming to evidence the link between a healthy mind and academic attainment. The EEF would not have funded us if we were not looking at outcomes around academic attainment. That is the school's roles to do that, and we don't want, we think it's important. But PSHE has not really been a priority in terms of policy. We know that we still struggle in terms of, it's not a statutory requirement, and schools, approach it from a whole range of different ways. Some very, very well, some very, very badly, and some are trying to in the middle, trying to make the absolute best that they possibly can. So a real mix. It will involve 30 schools, and the maximum we're allowed actually is 33 secondary schools from across the south of the UK, and that was purely a practical thing because of geography and people travelling a long way, because training is going to be a key element of this project, which I'll come to. So 15 treatment schools, 15 control schools. The randomisation of the schools that we have in place so far will happen in April, and then, because we haven't reached all the 30 schools yet, we will randomise those as they come in. What we are doing is following one whole year group from when they start in year 7, and we are following them for one whole year for 4 years through to year 10. What schools decide to do before and after is up to them. There's no commitment that schools have to then stick to this and do it forever and a day, because we don't even know until we get to the end of it whether this particular design would be the most appropriate, because we're going to learn a lot as we go along as well. But we are asking schools to deliver a very specific curriculum from year 7 through to year 10, and we're asking to deliver it in a specific way, and we're asking that staff be trained for each of the elements so that it feels like a coherent curriculum that builds on each other. So I said to you that we started with a list of programmes. Now, I know that there are loads and loads of programmes out there. We all know good programmes, and the comments that it's made before, that actually what we wanted to do was to develop a conceptual framework in which this PSHE delivery model could be trialled in schools. And we wanted that framework to be relevant, in line with adolescent development, relevant for where the students are right now. So the conversation I might have with a student in year 8 about drug and alcohol use would be very different to the conversation I might have with them in year 10. So the conversation moves forward based on where the student is right now. It's really important. And the other element is that we needed it to meet the PSHE requirement. So PSH education, not the economic bit. We are meeting most of the C part as well. We're looking at how we can strengthen. There's a couple of areas that we're not completely covering at the moment. We're looking at how we can strengthen that so that we could offer the PSHCE, but not the economic part. So this is the, and of course this is a different version of PowerPoint, so it's up my student experience. So what you have here is, in terms of the conceptual framework, is in year 7, all of the elements, and we're calling them elements rather than programmes. This is a whole curriculum which starts at year 7 and finishes at year 10. So the elements within year 7 are all about managing the world around me. So I'm a student, I've come into a new school, there's a whole new set of things I need to do, I'm meeting new people, I'm also changing in terms of the environment outside, I might have more freedoms perhaps, So how do I manage the world around me? Year 8 is then moving towards the future, starting to think more about, okay, what I'm doing now and how that relates to me as in the future. Year 9 is around taking control of the decisions I make, and year 10 is the beginning of adulthood. So you can see how what we did was we looked at those list of programmes, and we have now put these into a framework which builds and, you know, on each of those elements. So as I said, you know, the conversations we might have in year 8 with the students will be very different to the conversations we might have in year 10. So let's look in a little bit more detail at the elements then. So this is curriculum development delivery. We are asking the 30 schools to find 1 hour per week in their curriculum for PSHE. That's a challenge. We recognise it's a challenge. We know it's a challenge. We don't, and you know, what we're saying to schools up front is we know that you've got all of these other things that you need to do. But if they want to sign up to this project, then it's a requirement that that's what they have to do. So what you've got here is the elements of each of the years. So we've got year 7, year 8 here, and the numbers here are the number of hours in the curriculum. So you can see in year 7 we're taking 34 of the maximum 40 hours in year, because there's 40 hours in any one school year. We're including in there the data collection, because we realise that actually, you know, any randomised controlled study requires data. We will be asking the students to take both a health questionnaire and an academic test, either a literacy or a numeracy test. So we need to make sure that we've timetabled that in as well. So I'm just going to pick out a couple of these. So the Penn Resilience Programme is a cognitive behavioural programme which teaches skills for optimistic thinking, is sort of the basis of it. So it's recognising that we all have setbacks. We all come across things that we find difficult to cope with. But how do you cope with them? So if you meet a friend or a colleague who says, well, I just don't let things bother me, that doesn't help me if that thing is bothering me, and I don't know how. So what the PRP does is teach 7 cognitive skills, processes that young people can be taught. So we train teachers to teach these processes, and they learn these 7 skills, and then on top of these 7 skills they learn a whole set of problem solving, social skills, you know, things like decision making, overcoming procrastination, social skills training. So the idea that the cognitive skills that they're learning, which basically is what I think impacts on how I feel and how I behave, and if I don't like how I'm feeling and how I'm behaving, then I might want to understand what my thinking was, and then if it's just thoughts, because that's all they are, then I can do something about it. And they learn skills that can help them to challenge their thinking, making sure that they're not missing any important information, making sure that they're not making a mountain out of a molehill or a Himalaya out of a mountain. The programme is very much based on reality. This is not positive thinking. People say to me, oh yeah, you're involved in that positive thinking. No, I'm not. I actually think that positive thinking is as damaging potentially as negative thinking. If we ignore the difficulties, if we don't recognise that sometimes I found that difficult and why, you're missing so much. You know, if I pretend I'm never going to be ill, I'm going to miss those signs of illness that are going to be important. So it's not positive thinking, it's learning the skills of optimism wedded to reality. So recognising that my reality might be difficult, might be challenging, but I've got resources. We're building self-efficacy in young people to be able to say, well, I've got the resources to be able to deal with these situations. The reason this element is first is because we feel if you can learn these skills in year 7, you can then apply them and they're transferable to the whole range of things that you might come across in future. The Schools to Life programme is trying to get young people to, so that the research that sits behind it says, do young people want to do well? Yes. Do young people think that what they're doing now relates to them in the future? No. Do they understand what difficulty is and how to overcome difficulty? No. So the programme is aiming to address those 3 things. It actually gets, in this element, it will actually get young people to think about who it is they want to be in the future, who is their adult self, both in terms of employment, in terms of community, in terms of their sort of social setup, and they actually create, they pick images of them, their future selves. And then over the weeks, what the element is doing is then drawing their adult self closer to today. So they actually create timelines of where I am now and working in school and the lessons that I'm doing in school that don't relate at all to what I might do when I'm an adult, and it's making a link between who I am now and what I want to be in the future. And we think that in terms of the academic attainments, it's really going to focus young people on thinking about why school now is important. You will notice that we have, Botvin's Life Skills programme in here. I'm going to just say something which might be a little controversial, and I don't mean to offend anybody who knows any of these elements. We've really pushed the questions around them because we looked at life skills and we're going to use life skills and we like most of it. But there are elements of it that we think don't necessarily, travel really well. There are lots of, so within the programme there are lots of stuff that are obviously relevant, relevant to US and stats and figures and stuff. So all of that needs to be looked at because it needs to be relevant for our students here. But so what we're actually asking across the 3 levels is we're only using one level, and originally we was going to use level 2, but actually we're going to use level 1 with some of the elements of level 2. So we're not sure yet whether they're going to let us do that. We put the proposal on the table to them to say, these are the bits we want to do, and whether they're prepared to make them sort of tweaks and changes. Because as I said, we want this to be a whole curriculum. So some of the things that are being discussed here, we will have already covered in Schools to Life, and we would have already set up in terms of, these students will be used to working in an environment in that way. They will have set up a safe learning environment. They will know some of the, the conversations that they might have. None of that will be new, whereas a couple of the lessons in the life skills, actually the setup, it's all of that, trying to create that safe learning environment. So we haven't got all of the answers, but they are, they're certainly very keen because they're obviously very interested in this working as well. But I just wanted to let you know some of the challenges that we're facing. And then we have Year 9 and Year 10. So to just pick out a couple, the School Health Alcohol Harm Reduction Programme, has anybody heard of that? Sharp, a lot of work going on in Ireland and Scotland around that. So that's that element there. And Safer Choices is the suggestion at Year 9, but again we've got quite a lot of questions that we're asking around how well that programme travels here. So our sort of sense at the moment, does anyone know Safer Choices? It's lots of how do I say no to sex, in lots and lots of different ways, which is great, and we do want to discourage, we certainly want to reduce STIs and and HIV and those sorts of things, and we want to delay the first occasion of a sort of sexual relationship. But I think the idea of just say no, just say no, just say no might not necessarily work. So we're just asking some really questions around that at that point.
Can I just ask a question about how old are kids in Year 9?
Year 9 they will be 14, 15.
They might be a bit late in the day as well.
A lot of schools are saying that to us. For our kids, this would be too late.
Yeah.
But we've got to go with the. Some schools are obviously, as well, are not very keen that would put them off even being involved in it. So the fact that we're having those conversations with them. But you see, we think that on the back of them learning those cognitive, emotional, development skills, that actually, all right, for some young people that may be too late, but they would have the opportunity to be thinking about those sort of setbacks as part of that. Whereas, what we're doing is sort of moving those skills onto then conversations more around, say, Year 9 it is more of an abstinence type approach, but recognising that, for some young people they may well be in relationships and they may be, or not in relationships and having too much sex. We recognise that reality. But what we're going to do in the training is make sure that we bring out some of those conversations so teachers feel equipped to be able to manage those conversations, really, I suppose. I'm going to come back to teacher training in a second. And the one I'll pick out on here is the relationship smarts element, which is a fantastic element which looks at all types of different relationships. It looks at differences between infatuation and love. It looks at the whole range of different relationships that you might have, including sexual relationships. It also gets students to think about their relationships through the eyes of a child. So, what that might look like. So starting to think about, future parental roles and so on. And if anybody wants to know any more detail, then of course you can let me know afterwards. So sorry, I'll just go back because so teacher training is a really important element of all of this. And again, the next big challenge for schools, because we are asking schools to release their staff for 19 days of training over this 4 years. The EEF are funding the teacher training cover, which is one part, but that doesn't solve the problem back in school that staff have got to get, the schools have got to get that those lessons covered. But we feel strongly that if we want PSHE to be a credible, well-taught subject, you must train staff so that they feel equipped and skilled, and to be able to teach the subject to students. We know that, my evidence would be examples where schools get other people in to deliver certain elements. Now that works in some ways, and sometimes it's good for the students to have people outside coming in. But when those people go, that expertise sort of goes with it. And what we're trying to do is to create expertise. So, one of the hopes is that we would have PSHE expert teachers. And, teachers would think of that as a career option and a development that they might take. So we're not really apologising for that, but we are saying to schools we recognise how difficult that is for you. But if you want to do it well and if you want to see good outcomes, then you've got to invest in the training. You wouldn't see the good outcomes in terms of maths and English unless the teachers really knew the subjects well. Yes, sorry.
So it's really refreshing to hear about your vision about PSHE should be considered as a subject matter and an expertise in its own right.
Yep.
But obviously what we're up against here is the whole school system just doesn't see it that way. It's just a bolt-on and add-on, and they don't see the great value and importance of how it can affect everything in school. So can you just, for example, when you start talking about the amount of time necessary to bring in a programme, what kind of, have you had much resistance to that or not?
So your first part of that, I think I might disagree with that really. I think history might suggest that was the case, but the schools that we've approached over 400 schools, 15 academy chains. I've not had any resistance from schools to say this isn't worthwhile. This isn't worth doing, we don't understand why it's important, it's not our role. I've not had any of that, and my history in drugs education, I've certainly heard that in previous roles. What I have caught resistance around is timetabling and releasing staff for teacher training. They are practical, real issues that schools are trying to manage. And the schools that are saying no reluctantly. They want to be involved in this, they like that, that's generally the view. I've not had anybody who've said, well, this is a complete waste of time.
No, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is they're boxed in.
Absolutely.
Exactly for the reasons you've just said.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges is how do we de-box it?
Yeah.
And say that actually you need to reach this sort of web of how you work at the moment. You're saying, yeah, we really love what you want to do, we think it's valuable, but I can't do it because of this. So the question then's got to be, how do we change that setup to allow that 5% to open up and that to be plugged in, which means 5% of something's got to go.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether you're not...
Yeah, I haven't got the answer to that, no. We were sort of waiting for the PSHE consultation and hope, and then that sort of, we waited all this time and then it sort of said,
yeah.
I don't have all the answers to it. What I do know is that, what we're hoping is this isn't another example. This has had to be signed off by Michael Gove because it's, an RCT in schools. So, they have to have been interested, and I know that we've got someone here. I don't know whether you've got an answer to that particular question, but we are. This is one way in which we are trying to sort of nudge at the edges of it out.
And I think the importance of this, the really important, is that if there is a relatively small cluster that's big enough that has PSHE integrated with evidence-based programs that shows the kind of successes that we would hope it would show, that suddenly there is a working model that might then open up the doors to make people think maybe we've got to, and that's going to be around behaviour, exam results and general improvement, isn't it?
Yeah, and one model, because of, we're working with, PSHE Association, of course there are lots of different ways of looking at it, so this is just one example, which has, been nicely funded, so some people have said, well, it's okay because this has all been funded. one of the things that we're looking at is what happens beyond. So we're not saying to the schools involved, you've got to then do this forever and a day. We're saying that you will then have this expert team, and then you can you can build on these elements, you can pick and choose the bits that work for you. What will stay behind is the intelligence of the staff that have been involved in this, which I think is really valuable. And one of the questions that we are asking with all of this is, how can it be scaled up? It's no good for one of these. So, if I go back to the PRP, this is an expensive element because this is 5 days of training. It used to be 10. Before we took hold of it, the University of Pennsylvania wanted staff to be trained for 10 days. We managed to get it down to 5. They learn their skills at an adult level for the first 3 days. How can I learn these to me so that I'm not just a funnel of information? Actually, I can talk authentically about how this has affected me, how I've used it. So that if a student raises a question, I can answer it from a place of knowledge rather than just, because I've got these materials and this is what it says. So the first 3 days they learn the skills at an adult level, and the second 2 days, okay, how do I then, here's the student materials and how do I teach these to the young people? That's a big commitment, and we were told at the time when I first started this, schools will never buy it. They'll never buy into it, it won't be implemented. Why the local authority funding it? Great. That's not our experience. We've got 84 secondary schools, academy chains that are extremely interested. They value it. Yes, there's an investment, but they are feeling that the investment is worthwhile. Not all schools, of course,
there is no sort of financial incentive for the schools to take part or not.
No.
So they've got to find from within their resource. So there's nothing at all about releasing people for training or...
Well, the funding provides cover costs for the staff to come out for those 19 days training, and none of the training will be charged to the schools. That's all covered by the funding.
Okay.
So they will have that expertise and those materials beyond this project. So I suppose there is an investment from that point of view.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, sorry.
Lucy, Paul, you had an exchange just now about putting into place in as many schools as possible essentially a PSHE programme, and I'm still trying to make sense out of what's just been published on the PSHE consultation. I'm not quite sure what it's saying to who, other than this is what people said during the consultation. But the McDonald Review quite clearly recommended that PSHE skills be included in initial professional training, and that a career path be identified for PSHE teachers stroke pastoral teachers.
Yeah.
Anybody who's got anybody's ear who might be able to, could they be reminded? I know one of the immediate top level political responses to say, well, that was the last government.
Yeah.
But it did seem to me to be a very sound and very helpful set of recommendations.
I suspect
If there is any chance of reviving those, please do so.
I suspect it's going to be difficult to do so, but I think the Minister's interest in evidence is very clear, and it's going to be through, actually, let's not think about it in terms of PSHE, let's just think of it in terms of evidence-based education, which happens to be about health and well-being, and maybe we can get things kicked off in that perspective. It's a kind of, I wish it was otherwise, but I think that's the way that we're going to have to tackle this issue.
Round up
at the
rather
moment.
than
Yeah.
I think that's what the kind of ministers didn't say very much at all.
No.
Apart
reporting on what other
from
people
it's for
think.
schools
To
to
decide.
decide,
Yeah.
and it's very much for people to work with schools. Schools decide if schools think it's worthwhile, worth the time, worth the investment, going to contribute to what the school is trying to achieve, then that's for them to decide. So ministers didn't kind of
So don't.
Well,
didn't say don't, but didn't say do. They
Well, and the bit I
step
would add
back
to this,
really.
and that it would be seen as recognised by inspectors when they come in for their Ofsted.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we will be saying to schools involved in this, if you happen to get an Ofsted while you are in the process, please give us a call, because what we're going to try and do is to give, some of those ideas about how, because this is a commitment, and it does mean that potentially something else may be sort of put to the side while this is happening. But of course they can't put aside any of those things that they've got to deliver, because... Sorry, there's one here and then...
How do you decide which programme and which stage?
So that was really on that early work on our conceptual framework. So in line with adolescent development, relevant to where the students are right now, and to deliver the PSHE requirement. So, you know, a lot of the elements, you know, are based on particular age groups, and that's where the evidence sits. So we've included that within our sort of overall design. And we're not fully there with every bit of it yet. We've still got some design bits that we're working on.
So are they all high evidence programmes?
They are, individually,
Right.
yes. Yes, but I go back, you know, because the point that the gentleman made before, I mean, we're absolutely aware of that. So yes, they may have worked in that particular environment, that particular, you know, and we're now moving it from one country to the next, you know, quite often, because there are not many of them that are evidenced here, although Sharp is an example of one that is. You know, so it's trying to get below some of that. And there's, so I hope that answers the question, yes.
During the development of the programme, did you think of parental involvement at all?
Yes, and that schools ask us that all the time. So, you know, we are going to suggest, you know, and offer newsletters, support schools with, you know, briefings for parents so they at least know what their students are. And of course, it's a research project, so parents will need to know that their students are part of it. But yes. But not in terms of what we'd love to do is to do something where we were sort of training the parents alongside and looking at something, but I mean that's just a whole nother. Yeah, exactly, yes.
How flexible are those, let me back up. The school I teach in our middle school is the equivalent of year, I have to think about this. We go from grade 5 to grade 8.
7, 8, yeah.
So the equivalent of year 6 to year whatever the other one is.
Yeah.
Is it possible to move those ages down a year?
Not to be involved in this project, no.
But
the elements that are included, absolutely. So the PRP, for example, we've got a number of primary schools that teach that in year 5 very, very well. And actually, we did a very small research project at the LSC and analysed for us, and we saw some really fantastic results. I'm a people person, and what I love is the stories that you know. I know research is important, and I know that, you know, the government are very interested in it. But, you know, for me, the qualitative bit, you know, when you talk to the students about the impact it's had on them, when you talk to the staff about what they think this is, that's to me what brings it to life. The data is, you know, great, and I know we all need it, but the stories that you hear, you know, and the research in year 5 is, you know, is really, I think it's really good, you know, yeah.
May I interrupt at this point? Just to go back to your question, we have David Burton here, the Operations Manager of Core and Life Education, who might be able to answer.
I don't want to answer it, but I'm just fascinated by the research, because I mean the correlation, for most of us in the room, correlation between academic attainment and health. You don't have to. I don't want to prove it. I don't want to, you know, sit here and want to prove it. What I'm interested about is in the what would happen if academic attainment improved in the 15 schools that aren't receiving the PSHE, such that it improved health and well-being outcomes, because, you know, OECD reports say that's exactly what will happen, and I believe strongly it would be. If you can improve academic attainment, you'll improve health and well-being. So the correlation works both ways.
That's right, yeah.
Therefore, you know, therefore I wonder how you're going to sort of tease that out and prove that PSHE is what's impacting rather than improved academic attainment.
And I'm going to take the easy route here and say you'd have to ask the LSE about that, because the whole research side, you know, is not my expertise at all, and I would hate to say something that was incorrect.
Of course.
How I understand it is that you know, in terms of the power calculations, there are enough schools involved, and that the randomisation means that we could be quite certain. People are nodding, so that's good. You know, of some of that.
I would hope. Yeah. I would hope in a trial schools that if you're starting with an equal measure of academic achievement, that the aim of the schools would be to boost academic achievement within your schools such that it improved health and well-being. Sorry, I mean I don't want to be obtuse about it, but that's what I would hope.
Well, I suppose I go back to some of the context and looking at the profile of adolescents who are taking the extreme measure of taking their lives. And when you look at those, the profile of some of those students is that they were doing very well in school. So I'm not disagreeing, but I think there is some evidence to, and you know, we did a very small scale look at young people who are in our drug treatment service in Hertfordshire, and we looked at protective factors of those young people who were taking huge, risks, had drug problems, and they actually had quite a number of protective factors around them, but they were still choosing to take that risky behaviour. So, I think, and whatever it tells us, I think will be interesting.
I think there might be an assumption there that there's a linear causality rather than a dynamic causality.
No, I'm just taking one OECD report of 2010 and so it looks at the other view that says it's about academic attainment that influences health more above other factors. Looking at another report. And I'm a pragmatist. I'm not suggesting one or the other. I'm suggesting both have to align.
Yeah.
I think that's right, David. I mean, certainly the social determinants of health are very strong, aren't they? But they are not the only determinants of health. And similarly, the other way around. Actually,
my point.
People can be really happy and thriving, and still not be fantastically interested in their academic career. But we hope that enough of both would lead to better outcomes for more young people. I think I want to make sure that we